Hi, welcome back to my channel. This is for all the IB students out there who are prepping for their mock or for their finals. I thought it would be very helpful for them. So today I came along and brought you a paper 2 question that I made based on the test that my teacher gave me. So paper 2 covers developmental economics and international economics. Today I'll be talking about international economics and more specifically tariff. Alright, let's move on. So the first part of the paper 2 is they would give you an article, and I created an article, but I wasn't in the mood to actually have the entire article sent out. So what I did is I just pulled out some of the key points within the article that I created. So this pulling out the essential information out of the article is very important, and I hope you guys can do that by the time you guys actually take the test. Pause the video if you have to, and jot this down if you have to, and I'll be moving on to the questions. Alright, so here are the questions that I've created for you. So these are exactly the same way how the paper 2 is going to look like. So the first part, part A, which is worth 2 points, for I and II is going to be asking you about definitions. Here, I ask you guys to define tariff and to define dumping. And for B, it is worth 4 points, and you can see the question. Same for C, it's 4 points, and D is worth 8 points. One thing you guys want to know before you go ahead and write D is that you have to write it out as if it is a paper 1 question, where you have to put the definition, put the graph if you need to, but if the graph is referenced before, you can just reference it to the graph that you drew before. So pause the video. I want you guys to solve the questions to the best of your abilities, and I'll be explaining the answer in a moment. Alright, so before I move on to question B, C, and D, I would just like to say what I would just like to explain to you guys what tariff and dumping really means. So for tariff means putting a type of tax onto the imported goods, and it is usually for restricting the number of goods that come inside a country. So these are the major points that you have to have within the definition in order to score this point. Now, next on, dumping. Dumping is when a country purposefully sells a product to another country at a cheaper price than producing it. Alright, so I'm gonna move on to part B now. So before I even begin explaining the different parts of how to solve this question, you have to draw the graph right, because the graph is worth 2 points, and it's crucial for you to get this graph right. Okay, so first of all, some of the things I want to note about the graph. So you want to put label as small d under demand and supply to show that it is the domestic supply and domestic demand, because that is different from the international supply lines. So please be aware of that. Also, don't forget to label your axes about quantity and price. Another thing that I really want to note is that you have to write the currency. If it's in the US, then you have to put the US dollar. If it's in Korea, you have to write the Korean won. Here it is Pakistan, and Pakistan uses the Pakistani rupee, so you have to write rupee on the price. That is crucial. If you don't write it in our school, my teacher counts it as wrong. So it's best for you to put the currency here. Don't forget about that. Alright. So what I did is I showed the shift in the international supply line from PW to PW plus tariff. PW means price world, or the world price, and it is the standard way of how you would label this. So you would label it PW, and after the tariff, it would be moving up to PW plus tariff. Alright, let's get down to the actual part of actually solving this question. Now if you've drawn the graph successfully, you've done half of your job. Now you have to go on and actually answer the question. So when you're answering the question, although it only asks you about how it affects the consumers in Pakistan, it is important for you to still list out all the ways, all the parts of the graph, because you just want to be safe, because you never know what the mark scheme is going to look like. Alright, So I'm gonna start with price. So the price you have to note, and you have to all these parts you have to state it in a paragraph. Not a single part of this can you leave out. It is crucial for you to actually have all these parts. So the way you want to write this is split it between before and after the tariff. So before the tariff, the price was at PW, and after the tariff, the price is going to be PW plus tariff. And before the tariff, domestically demanded quantity is going to be Q2 before the tariff, and after the tariff, it's going to be Q4. So when you're answering the question, you later on. Oh wait, I'll explain that later. So it's also good for you if you note where the government revenue is, because it just shows that you're smart, and the mark scheme might have that the student has to show the government revenue. So just in case, So government revenue, and it's good for you to know anyways. So before it was 0 because there was no tariff, and after the tariff, the government tariff revenue is going to be Q4 minus Q3 times tariff. So the way you would write this is you can write PW plus tariff minus PW, but that's the same thing as tariff. So you can write that as Q4 minus Q3 times tariff. And so that shaded little box over here is the amount of money that the government actually makes. All right, moving on to imports. So before, the import quantity was at Q2 minus Q1. And after the tariff, it's going to be Q4 minus Q3. Now, why is this? This is because before the domestic production was at Q1 and the domestic quantity demanded was at Q2. So as you can see, the Q1 is so far left compared to Q2. Now, they have to satisfy this huge gap, and that huge gap is fulfilled by imports. That's why Q2 minus Q1 becomes the import before tariff. Now, same goes for after the tariff. After the tariff, if you subtract Q4 and Q3, that little gap is going to be the import amount. So when you're writing the essay, it is important for you guys to note how much the quantity demanded decreased. It is important for you guys to note how the domestic production increased when there's a tariff. And quantity demanded only decreases and domestic production only increases if it's a properly functioning tariff. Alright, so now you have to actually answer the question about how it affects the consumers. Now, after saying all of that, you have to extract the core information that price has increased and the quantity demanded actually decreased. Now, that is quite self-explanatory based on the law of demand, but it is important for you guys to explain that process of the law of demand. That if there's increase in price, the consumers are less willing and able to purchase more of the product. That's why the quantity demanded actually falls. It is important for you guys to note that. And yeah, that would be your answer for question B. It negatively affects the consumers because the price actually increased before compared to the times when there was no tariff. So that would be your sum up sentence. That would be very crucial for you to have because that's kind of the main answer for your question. But that doesn't mean everything part else is trivial. All this is very important for you to have. All right, moving on to question C. Wait, I forgot to tell you guys when you draw the graphs, but it is also very important for you guys to label your graph. I forgot to do that. As you can see, it is very easy to make this mistake, so don't make it when you actually take the test. So, the question C is asking you about how the supply, using the supply and demand graph, you have to talk about how the tariff affects the cotton textile industry. So notice how it's not the cotton industry, it's the cotton textile industry, which is the industry that uses cotton as its basic resource to actually produce their products. All right. So for this part, your graph. So this is a basic supply and demand graph, just showing the cotton textile industry, the market. So you would draw demand, the supply, and you would show that the supply shifted to the left. And once again, you have to label your axes with quantity, and the price of a rupee. Also, it is good for you guys if you put arrows because it's more clear how the thing shifted. And it's easier for yourself to actually see how the things change, and it's easier for you to answer the question. And the markers are going to be, or the checkers, the moderators, whatever you want to call it, the examiners, they are going to be going like, oh, this kid knows what he's doing. So you guys preferably draw the arrow. What else? Yes, and label the Q1, Q2, P1, P2. Alright. So moving on to the actual explanation of why the market for the cotton textile industry actually has a shift to the left of supply. All right, so you would first start off talking about how the cost of production actually increases. So remember how remember from part B that the tariff actually increased the domestic prices of cotton. And that is going to be an increase in cost of production for the cotton textile market, because for the producers of cotton textiles, cotton is a major resource for them to create their final product. So that's an increase in cost of production. So moving on, you would have to refer to the law of supply. You would be talking about how suppliers are less willing and able to actually produce more cotton textiles, and that is why the supply actually shifts to the left. Now, equilibrium. So a lot of my friends seems to neglect the fact that the equilibrium point is not really important to write down here, but it is very important to write it down because the examiners look for that. So it's important for you to write every single part that you can find over here. So what you would write is that the equilibrium point for the quantity shifts to the left from Q1 to Q2, so it decreases. For the price, you would talk about how the price increases from P1 to P2. All right, for the last part B question. So the question is about devaluing the tariff in its entirety. So what you would have to do is that you would compare the advantages and disadvantages of the tariff and give yourself and give a final conclusion, which is going to be your self-judgment. All right. So I'll be talking to you guys first about the advantages of the tariff. So first of all, quite obviously, as noted within the article, you can avoid dumping. And it is important for you guys when you guys are solving question D that you refer to the article directly. So, and the article says quite specifically that it is capable of preventing dumping practices from the US. Also, it is able to protect the cotton producers, which are less competitive than the US cotton producers, as can be seen when the US cotton producers are dumping all these cotton. Also, because of the tariff, so in the previous question, we were able to see that the production actually increases. And because the production increases, the producers need more workers. So quite naturally, the employment would increase. Also, the tariff revenue for the government increases for Pakistan because they placed a tariff, ? And with the increased tariff revenue, they may be able to help the cotton textile industry by subsidizing those producers. So these are the advantages. So notice how from point 1 to 4, it's a logical reasoning, and it's not much of a memorizing process. So don't try to cram all this inside your brain, rather try to understand it. All right, moving on to the disadvantages. So for the disadvantage of the tariff is that it is damaging for the cotton textile industry because the cost of production increased. And the cost of production increases because before the tariff, these cheap US cotton were in the market, but now they're kind of gone. So they have to purchase the expensive Pakistani cotton, So the cost of production would increase and they would have to reduce production, and that is hurtful for the cotton textile industry. Now, with the tariff, this may cause trade retaliation from US. This means that the US may not like the tariff policy and may retaliate to Pakistan in different forms of trade policies. So the US may find the different trade policies they already have with Pakistan and change the terms to be unfavorable for Pakistan, and this may roll out into a huge trade war, which is what's happening between China and US as of right now. And that is highly unfavorable, quite obviously, because as you can see, the trade export, or the total trade export in the entire globe, at least for the US and Pakistan, drops. And that is very unfavorable because the real GDP would drop, as you guys know, because the aggregate demand, it constitutes of net export. Lastly, the tariff would decrease world efficiency. So according to the theory of comparative advantage, the country that has the country who has a lower opportunity cost should specialize in creating this product. And in this case, the US does have the comparative advantage because they're capable of dumping. And if you're capable of dumping, it is usually that the other country that is dumping has a comparative advantage over the other country that is struggling. And there's a decrease in world efficiency because a less efficient producer, the Pakistani cotton producers, are trying to fulfill the domestic demand. Yes. All right, so now I'm going to move on to the conclusion of the answer. So here's the part where you give the final judgment. Okay, to be quite honest, there are advantages and disadvantages for a tariff, so it's kind of hard to just from seeing those aspects and giving a final judgment because it's quite balanced. So it's unclear whether or not tariff is a good policy. When this happens, it is good for you to split the short term and long term, and that's how I usually do it to give a fine judgment where it is quite logical. So in the short term, it is great because you can protect the domestic industries that are failing against foreign cotton industries. So yeah, you're protecting your domestic industry and they're flourishing. So that's great. Also, the tariff revenue would gives more money to the government, and the government is capable of spending that revenue in a good way, I guess, and which is very beneficial. So in the short term, it is great. The tariff is great. However, in the long term, there are consequences. So first of all, the firms become heavily reliant upon the tariff, the protectionism policy that Pakistan sets up. This is because when there's tariff, you guys can notice that the international producers actually decrease because the imports decrease. And when that happens, there's reduced competition. So there's less incentive for the domestic producers to actually try hard, make the quality of cotton better, or try to invest in capital to make a more efficient way of producing cotton. So if you take away that competition, the domestic producers become heavily reliant on the government, and they don't find the proper incentive to actually improve themselves. Also, if the firm becomes heavily reliant on the government, the problem is that it's really hard politically for the Pakistani government to actually repeal the tariff policy because it became so essential for these reliant firms. So in the long term, the tariff policy is quite bad because it's not really sustainable. So this is the part you give a alternative suggestion. You would say, instead of the tariff policy, why not consider the World Trade Organization? Of course, a lot of people say that the World Trade Organization is dysfunctional because none of the countries really listen to them. However, let's assume that this world is an ideal society and the World Trade Organization functions properly. So instead of dealing with the dumping through tariffs, it might be more preferable for the Pakistani government to actually tell the World Trade Organization, hey, can you investigate into this case of US trying to dump cotton on us? Because dumping is an illegal economic activity. So if the World Trade Organization actually verifies that a country is dumping, they can't dump anymore. And to be honest, dumping is a very obscure concept. It is very hard to prove. So if the World Trade Organization actually proves that the US is actually not dumping, the Pakistani government may consider actually opening a free trade with the US so that they can have open up with the US to have free trade, because the US has a comparative advantage in creating the cotton. So according to the theory of comparative advantage, whoever has the lower opportunity cost to specialize in that particular product. In this case, the US has the upper hand. So the Pakistan government may try to make a compromise to have a trade deal where the US specializes in cotton and Pakistan specializes in something else. Thank you for watching today. I'll see you next time.